Honourable Member for Vieux South.
Mr. Speaker, I think there are times in my living memory I appreciate the fact that I've been in this House since 1997 and now approaching 21 years. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because inevitably there are so many memories, and from time to time one has to turn to the living experiences in this House to explain current behavior, current policy, and even to share with members particular experiences over time. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it is a delight to hear honourable members even on the opposing side, because there are moments when they are tempted to say things that compels you to search in the passage of time to be able to respond to. It's no secret that I particularly enjoy the member for Castries Southeast. I really do. And last sitting of the House, Mr. Speaker, you may recall that after he spoke, I quipped that the honourable member is born again because he made certain disclosures, certain statements that were so different from previous positions that he had taken that for all practical purposes, I think we are dealing with a member who had adopted a new policy, a new approach, that he had renounced the past. Of course, I did not believe that it was a change of faith because I know the honourable member is anchored to his faith, Mr. Speaker. I merely meant, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member had declared changes in policy approach, and so it is with this CDB loan. I have sat in this honourable House and heard the honourable member criticize viscerally, fiercely, without any remorse, the Caribbean Development Bank. And frankly, there are occasions when I have agreed with him that basically the Caribbean Development Bank is doing a disservice to this island and to the region. Mr. Speaker, I say unashamedly that I do not support the current management of the Caribbean Development Bank. I don't. I've hinted that before in this Parliament. Why? Because I do not believe that the current management of the Caribbean Development Bank are living to what the founding fathers of the bank, and in particular our own Sir Arthur Lewis, pronounced for that bank. The Caribbean Development Bank has departed from that. And the Caribbean Development Bank has lost sight that the reason for its existence is to facilitate the economic development of small islands. That is in the founding document. That is what Sir Arthur preached. And that is what Sir Arthur, when he was president of the bank, attempted to do. The bank has long departed, Mr. Speaker, from that founding principle. Now, what does this have to do with this loan here? This loan to finance consultants. There is nothing that the Caribbean Development Bank loves more than consultants. Nothing. Every single project must have consultants. Everyone. It's an industry. And the Caribbean Development Bank in particular has a fascination for Canadian consultants. It's not often you get them appointing regional consultants, except when it suits their purposes, for example, like assessment of poverty reduction. They may use a firm out of Trinidad whose credentials I myself have great difficulty with, but be that as it may. So the moment the Caribbean Development Bank sees a proposal for consultants, it latches onto it. Latches onto it. And by the time they're finished, they have their consultants all lined up. I think it's interesting because I was hoping the honorable member might have spoken briefly on the experiences with the Bextor drainage project. I'm certain the honorable leader of the opposition, in his capacity as a former minister of infrastructure, would remember the pain he endured with the Caribbean Development Bank over the rehabilitation of Bextor and to resolve the drainage issues confronting the people of Bextor. That CDB had promised to make the allocation of the funds available. They insisted that there be consultants, year in, year out consultants waiting for reports. When they finished with the reports, they insisted they had to engage the public, the people of the community, to tell them what they were proposing. But then when that was finished, months passed, nothing happening, the elections came, and of course today I don't know exactly where the project is. I'm sure the honorable member would not resist it at the right time to disclose to us where that project is. It's true, I know he's a project engineer, so I mean, he would be able to tell us exactly where things are at and whether that's one of those projects that he stopped. Your Bextor project, you know full well.
Drainage.
Your drainage project. The same one when the honorable member was having community meetings, you arranged for certain of your principal acolytes to attend. I mean, I'm sure you remember that. Now, that having been said, that's a big difference between us. We are always welcoming. But that being said, Mr. Speaker, I just want to issue a word of caution. Just a word of caution, Mr. Speaker. I have had the opportunity to interact with all the major agencies at our doorsteps. World Bank, European Union, Caribbean Development Bank, OFID, you name it, Kuwaiti Fund. But there are three of those who constantly blame lack of implementation on local authorities and local personnel. All the time they do it, Mr. Speaker. You look at the rate of implementation, for example, of the European Union in the Caribbean, and you will discover that that rate of implementation is abysmally low. Abysmally low. Every year you come to the House in a budget, you announce what the allocations are for, and then in the course of the year, you look for the results, they are never there. And whenever you tackle the European Union, they always tell you that it has to do with the lack of capacity in the various governments. I have always contested that, always. Why? For the very reason that the leader of the opposition mentioned earlier on, that for years this country has invested heavily on training civil servants to design and to implement projects. No country in the Eastern Caribbean has invested as heavily as St. Lucia has in training its civil servants to implement, design, whatever it is, where projects are concerned. No country. Even the very same Caribbean Development Bank, for years, year in, year out, it brought in people to CDB and elsewhere to train them how to design projects for the Caribbean Development Bank so that projects could be reviewed, projects could be approved or disapproved or amended as the case may be. Never happened. No change. Question is why? The question is why. And Mr. Speaker, I will share my views because I have never been shy to share them. I have always challenged the European Union to conduct an audit of its procedures. I have always said to the European Union, you do an independent audit of the procedures that you are utilizing to assess projects, to monitor projects. Now you hear a lot of talk about hospitals, Mr. Speaker. The OKEU hospital. Yes, the hospital was the brainchild of the former St. Lucia Labour Party government, and that's one of the problems today. But I'll choose my words on another occasion. But I'll say this. That hospital has now taken over 8 years to bring to life. And I'm not today going to engage in blaming this side over delays or changes they made with the hospital. That's not my point today. And you know why, Mr. Speaker? One of the fundamental reasons why it has taken so long has to do with the European Union, had to do with procurement processes, had to do with the fact that that organization was not able to respond quickly and adeptly to the various proposals and recommendations coming from the public sector functionaries in the country. It has nothing to do, as people assume, with lack of decision in the Ministry of Health or among public officers. It had everything to do with the approach of the European Union because, among other things, in the vast majority of cases, they insisted that when bids had to be created to go out, it had to go out to ensure that interested parties in the member states were given the opportunity to bid. The Caribbean Development Bank is no different. I have always said, and I will continue to say, that the Caribbean Development Bank need to do an audit of its procedures. It could not have been right that after Hurricane Thomas, it took months, literally months, and then gel into years to obtain funding from the Caribbean Development Bank to repair the damage caused by Hurricane Thomas. So today, when the honorable member begins to sing the praise of the Caribbean Development Bank, I have to say he's born again. Born again. What has changed? I don't use that term, born again. I don't. My religious persuasion is of a different kind to yours. So we can ignore that for the time being. So what has changed all of a sudden, Mr. Speaker, that the honorable member is in the embrace of the Caribbean Development Bank to the point that he is so happy and pleased that they have approved this $13.23 million loan, ostensibly for another cycle of planning. We will have time, hopefully, to cast judgment. He says they will develop a sustainable path by the year 2022 when this plan has to come to life. So we'll be around, hopefully, if time is kind to us, to 21, God willing, to make a judgment on whether this supposed training has resolved any issues. But I want to say this, and this is my point, that we can do as much training as we want of public officers and functionaries, about technocrats. The problem is not with them. The problem is with the institutions who have responsibility to make those loans or resources available to you. And unless we understand that and force those institutions to change their ways, we are going to be stuck in mud all over again. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do not wish to enter the realm of political debate, but when you see statements are made that carry the implicit condemnation of previous actions, then you are forced to respond. And I know that my colleagues, both to my left and to my right, has done a sufficient job to respond, but it's interesting that this administration can now come to the House and say, as a member for Castries South says, that we're now going to be developing a vision plan of where we want to go. Forget that it is almost 3 years now, too late. Forget that. Forget that. And it's going to be about results and implementation, howsoever it is dressed up. But I remember, just after the elections, the Honorable Prime Minister announced that we are creating a cluster cabinet, because by creating a cluster cabinet, we're going to have a coherent approach. We would be running an efficient government. We'll be implementing a plan. We'll be focused. And of course, Ernst & Young was brought here too. Up to now, we don't know how much they were paid for their contribution to the budget, which I understand that the civil servants were laughing at afterwards. And I made the point last year that there was nothing in that budget that has changed from previous years. And if Ernst & Young knew what it was doing, it would never have accepted to do any contract in St. Lucia because of conflict of interest. Never. Never, ever. Because it is representing clients here. Clients that deal with the government of St. Lucia. Never have done it, but that's a different matter for another time. But what have we seen with the cluster cabinet? Step by step, it has been dismantled. The final rights were given to the cluster cabinet a few days ago when certain individuals were elevated to ministerial positions. Now, I don't know. I'm not asking any questions. I don't want any explanations. I don't know whether some motion of no confidence had something to do with it while these changes were made. But all I know, the inspiration from a Prime Minister called Holness out of Jamaica finally entered a deep hole, and mercifully St. Lucia was spared the consequences of it. Today, we have now returned to what essentially is an orthodox cabinet as the Westminster system prescribed. Well, maybe except 2, but these you can forgive for good reason. And in time, the good reason of which I speak will become clearer. The question, Mr. Speaker, is this: what will be the results of these supposed workshops, etc.? And I have said before, in a previous contribution to this House, that one of the big problems that we have with regional organizations is accountability. It'd be interesting to see this outcome of this magnum opus of CDB, which the member says that CDB is busy doing elsewhere, but they have chosen St. Lucia first to do it. So I hope that when the minister has got everything in place and the plan is completed, that it will be presented to this House, at least to recognize that this House considered the motion before it for this $13.2 million. As for me, Mr. Speaker, I'm not supporting this motion. This is unnecessary. I do not believe that our civil servants should be sidelined. I believe that we have competent, well-educated civil servants. I believe we have sound technocrats in our public service. I believe that those technocrats know exactly what the country requires, but the issue has always been one of political leadership. And with all the avowed skills of honorable members on the other side, I would have hoped that they would have been able to harness, use their political leadership to harness this vast army of skills that exists in the public service. Alas, we have now to turn again to external consultants to give us the guidance that we need. So for me, Mr. Speaker, conscience or no conscience, I make it absolutely clear that I will not be supporting this motion before the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.